Hello and welcome everyone to our channel, Pivot to Inclusion. I'm Dr. Nasiah Cirincione-Ulezi, and I'm here with co-owner Dr. Scott Herbst, and we welcome our guest today, Miss Beth McKee. She is a friend and a colleague, and I'm so happy to have this opportunity to have you come and speak with us today. So if you could just share with folks your background and expertise as we move into the topic of white saviorism.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. It's so cool to be able to do this with both of you. Um, so, my background, I am a board certified behavior analyst. Firstly, though, I come from a different background, which is my undergraduate was in human services and early childhood special education, and specifically early intervention. I later got into behavior analysis and became board certified later in my career. And so I'm currently working, well, now with COVID, I'm not traveling, currently working overseas in China. And so at a clinic there, and working with the community and people. It's a hospital-based clinic, it's outpatient. And so I work with the community essentially to provide training and so that they can have a clinic for families and children with disabilities as well as autism.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And what I want to share with everyone is why I invited you here. One, I think you are amazing. I love your body of work, and you and I became acquainted through actually Scott's courses. But I really want people to understand that you were invited to speak on this topic specifically because of your expertise around working with a culture outside of your own in another country as a white woman. So we're speaking on white saviorism. And because you have such a wealth of knowledge coming, being informed from early childhood special education, from human services, and I was also trained in those systems, you understand the importance of working from a strength-based perspective. So if you could just share with everyone what you know, or what your operational definition of white saviorism is.
Right. So, white saviorism, I think, in layman's terms, for me, is this idea that as a white Caucasian woman from America, that I would go and use my background, my expertise, my knowledge and experience to go and help, which really means change, some people who are in need of some kind of help or some change to make their life better. And that I essentially know what's best and what needs to be changed. And that I will go and, quote, save this individual or this group or this community, because from the white saviorism perspective, I think that there is underlying is this idea that there's something inherently wrong or inherently needs to be fixed.
Yes.
Which no.
That's
No. I want the community to lead me. I want the individual to lead me. And so, Nasiah, we had talked about a little bit about, especially from the background in human services, as the other will inform me. I'm not informing the other.
that's where it is. That's where
Hey, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Because I have this big idea of like white saviorism as, I'm just reading a book and it's talking about how, like sending missionaries into Africa or South America and really like kind of these like broad international colonization movements,
Mhm.
right? So that's kind of like where my thinking is. And so I'm curious, like in the world of human services, how does white saviorism show up, right? At like, like in a way that I could recognize it in my day-to-day life. Because just right now, it kind of feels like this far off thing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I think if we, Nasiah, do you want to speak on this? Or do
Oh,
you
no,
want me to
you could go ahead. Go ahead.
So I'm immediately going into early intervention. Just the first kind of example I think of would be the idea that we need to change children so that they have access to some opportunity, but it's through the teacher or through the intervention, versus going, and that family would quote go to a center.
Yes.
Okay, so you're pulling them out of their community, one, whoever the group, the individual is, and then this idea that there has to be some kind of intervention that was typically formed historically by Caucasian men, typically, without the context of knowing what the community need was on a systems level versus an individual level.
Yes.
And so I think it's looking at the system in the community and hearing from the community what their needs are. And then that takes place within the community by the people in the community.
That's it. That is it. Absolutely. That is key. That, we really, as behavior analysts, we understand the importance of addressing socially significant behaviors, things that are socially significant to the family, to the individual, not to us as the clinician. So when I think about practicing, a way to practice in my mind from my training is really looking at individual strengths. It's so easy for us as clinicians to go into communities, to go into homes and look at everything that is wrong. My training was, Nasiah, go into a home, a community, look for what is working and build from that perspective. What do you think, Beth?
I'm immediately thinking of the individualized family service plan.
Yes, IFSP, yes. Yes.
And right from the get-go, if you remember, right, it was just beaten into my head, essentially, is you're immediately going right into what the resources are of the family and the strengths. And it's of the family and what those are in the community.
That's it.
Yes, there's also an area for needs, but those are written into an IFSP. And so I think moving with that step forward, that foot forward, is really important, is just what you're saying. It's identifying right from the outset what the strengths are of the individual, what the strengths are of the organization, et cetera, whatever, whoever is your client.
Yes. Yeah. You know what I find too, and I don't know if this has been your experience, when you do work outside that framework and you're not working from a strengths-based perspective, the work you put in is not sustainable. It doesn't last. It's almost like you're working for naught, because you'll go in, you'll try to put in an intervention or some system, and it won't be maintained because people haven't bought into it.
I was just going to say that speaks to buy-in.
Yes.
So what has been my experience is that buy-in is no longer a problem. And I will say, I'm going to be completely vulnerable here. Like, when I was trained early on in behavior analysis, I was guilty of not doing this my entire career.
Yes.
It's been good to circle back and get back in touch with the importance of building that partnership, and even families as leaders.
Yes.
Beyond partnership. Because what happens is buy-in isn't a discussion. It's not on the table anymore, because if it's coming from the individual, it's oriented towards them to begin with. That's not coming from me.
That's right.
It's coming from them. So that makes it sustainable.
It's sustainable, exactly. And like I said, the biggest thing for me as I look back on my career is I've realized I'm a tool, and I come in and I can definitely use myself to plant a seed. But because I've worked in the field for so many years, what means the most to me is when I run into a family and something that I planted a seed for, but the family did the work, they did the heavy lifting, and it changed that child's life today. Let me share a story, if I may. You know, I was taking a walk the other day in my neighborhood, and I ran into one of my families that I work with. Now it's been about 12 years. Now I worked with the little girl when she was about 3 or 4,
Okay.
and she was an eloper. She would run out of the classroom, and we
Mm.
worked so hard to change that behavior. And I saw her with her mom walking down the street, hand in hand still, but she was with her mom walking the dog. And I
Yeah.
looked and I said, wow, her mom, the hours she put in to make that happen. But that's what was important to her. It
Right.
was important to her that at some point her daughter be able to walk with
Walk.
her. Now, I had my own ideas of what should have happened, but I
Right.
took what she said, what the family strengths were, and planted that seed. And boy, did it turn into her being a teenager now.
Yes.
And you know, from the folks you've worked with, that is a huge life skill to
Yes.
be able to walk alongside your parent in the community that not everybody makes it to.
That's right. Yep. And having that parent have the freedom, I think, to be able to share what's important to them. I can. I'm just thinking of times when I've had the thought, well, we can't do that. That's your red flag.
Yes.
That's the red flag moment. If you find yourself saying we can't do that or something similar, that's your red flag to check.
Absolutely. To
Can you
check.
give an example of that?
Yes, I can. I can give a lot of examples of thinking that. Okay, so one was I was in the clinic in China and walking around and saw an occupational therapist working with a little one, probably looked maybe 2.5, somewhere like that, 2.5, 2.5, 3. And I saw them working on trying to put beads onto some kind of lace or something, but it was small. It wasn't the big chunky ones. These were small plastic beads. And immediately my brain's like, that's not developmentally appropriate. She shouldn't be doing that. Why? And I, have all of these thoughts. And really thinking about the context of children who are going to be using chopsticks at a young age. In fact, those are appropriate to the child that she was working with. And so that's an example right there. I went into that whole thing of like, that's, that developmentally appropriate thing was just calling it out. And it's just wrong.
That is it. Let me ask you this, because we've also talked specifically about our training, because we have been cross-trained in different fields. One of the reasons I'm able to go in and really look and identify family strengths is because I was trained to be a reflective practitioner. And
Right.
I was trained in that practice early on. Just the whole idea of don't just go in and do, focus on being. How you are and how you show up is
Yes.
so powerful and can be far more important than what you're doing
Right.
when you show up. Can you speak to that? Because I think being reflective and mindful about the way we practice can help us, one, engage in cultural humility as practitioners, and two, avoid the saviorism that we tend to do in so much in our field.
Yes. And I think we're at a good time in our field, especially Scott, and you can speak to this, with starting to hear our thoughts, pay attention, and recognize what our thoughts are. So I'm going to put that to the side, put that on the shelf for a minute, because that will come into play. So reflective practice, I have to giggle a little bit, Nasiah, because it was one of the things in my undergrad that I just really loathed and didn't realize at the time the power in it on a regular basis, right? So for
just say something for anyone who's not familiar. Could you actually say something about what reflective practice is, how it works, sure. Give people a little sense of the process of it? Cool.
That's it. So reflective practice is really taking a step back from whatever it is you're engaging in and being mindful and thinking about it, reflecting on it, looking into yourself and questioning how you feel, how you are, instead of just doing. So if you're trained specifically as an educator, a social worker, it's a part of practice. So after every lesson we do as teachers, there's a component where at the end where you do reflection. How did things go? Checking in with yourself. And there's reflective practice, reflective supervision. Scott and I, we do training. And after each training, we take time to debrief and reflect. Because if you don't create space and time for it, as simple as it is, it often doesn't get done. And a lot gets missed and not addressed.
Right. I think the strength, now that you've defined it so well, is that the person that you are doing reflective practice with actually is your model. Right?
Yes.
They are facilitating your ability to reflect. There are tools that can support this kind of practice. And so I was lucky enough to have mentors who it was already ingrained in our curriculum in the teaching college that I went to. And so just as you had said, we also did before and after. Yeah. So it was preparing for what I was going into with identifying what my thoughts were about it, what I was bringing to the context.
Yes.
And that was hard. But again, this is where it's really necessary, I think, to have good models who are already comfortable with vulnerability.
Yes.
Because if you can't, I just feel like it's just empty and meaningless to go through the motions if you're really not going to be vulnerable about your own biases, your own fears.
That's right.
Your own shortcomings. And so with that requires a person to be able to model those things for you. That then makes it safe for your supervisee or whoever you're doing it with to also engage in this. This is where the learning happens for the individual who is engaging in that, and also for the supervisor. Now in a supervisory position years later, it's amazing how much we get back as supervisors too, and continue to learn about ourselves, right? But we're really, that stage needs to be set intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you have the tools, if you're not coming at it from that perspective, you're just spinning your wheels.
Yes. Oh, I could talk to you all day, Beth. Absolutely. Couple things I want to tack right now that you are speaking to. One, space and time needs to be created for this. It's not happenstance.
Oh no.
It doesn't just happen. This is a very intentional, like you said, process.
Yes.
Create space and time for it. And another thing that you're speaking to, and I just want to amplify it, folks, bidirectionality. This is not something to supervisor to supervisee, mentor to mentee. This is bi-directional. And that vulnerability piece, because there are parallel processes involved. You have the supervisee's relationship with the supervisor's relationship with the supervisee translates into the supervisee's relationship with the family's relationship with their child. So it's all flowing back and forth, bi-directional. directionally. And that's what makes it so powerful. What I'm really seeking to do at this point in my career is bridge some of these practices,
Yeah.
from education, social work into our field,
Right.
because it's so needed and so powerful. I think it's so simple
Yeah.
that people think it couldn't possibly work. Yeah, it
Yeah.
works.
Yeah, it does work. It does work. I think the challenge is in getting to a space, I think, especially in our field with the vulnerability piece.
Yes.
There is some kind of like level of arrogance that gets kind of like put across. I was lucky enough early on in my behavior analytic training to have a supervisor who actually tacted that and said, be careful not to fall into becoming arrogant, because you're getting reinforced, right? As you're working, you're seeing the progress. So you're getting reinforced you can get into a space of rightness. I'm right. This is right. What I do is right.
Yes.
Um,
I dealt
and
with
that-
this, a form of this, I would say, early in my career,
Yeah.
in that I thought because I knew something about behavior that I wasn't, like, somehow I'd broken free of control of the contingencies of reinforcement, or I wasn't going to get caught up in them, and just wasn't subject anymore to, like, I honestly thought I had an objective view of the world. And thought I had an objective view of myself as part of the world. And I think that was the mistake I made, was thinking that I could actually see the things that were controlling my behavior. And with me, that manifested as arrogance, right? Because, like, oh, I'm above the contingencies now, and I think there's a danger in our field to fall into that because, look, I can only see, I don't know what, like 30% of the world.
Yeah.
Right? And stuff back here would be running, but I, couldn't see it.
Wow. You know what? While this is on my mind, I want to say it. There is a gentleman. Are either of you familiar with Dr. Alan Neuringer from Neuringer? I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. He is from Reed University.
Tell me more. It might ring a bell once you get going.
No, I'm just going to say no. I don't know who that is.
I don't know by name. I'm wondering if what the content is. Yeah.
Let me tell you, somebody forwarded me his name. They gave me his name. He wrote an article in 1991. I had never heard of this article. It's called Humble Behaviorism. Now, I am all about cultural humility. He wrote, and this was, humble. This is a white man. He wrote Humble Behaviorism in 1991. And everything that we have just said on this call is in that article back from 1991. Now, of course, I had to reach out to him.
Yeah.
I had to reach out to him and because I am like, how have I not heard of this article? It has never come up in any of my courses. But I think it just speaks to, in our field, what gets elevated. Here I am thinking I'm one of the pioneers in the field for cultural humility. No, there have been people who've talked about this, but those articles don't get highlighted. They're not making it into the classroom. So I'm wondering, what is it about our field that doesn't promote as we should some of these really evidence-based practice, because reflective practice is evidence-based. Using cultural humility is evidence-based, but why hasn't it taken root in our field?
I don't know the answer for sure. I just have something that keeps coming up is when I was preparing for this discussion a little bit, what came across, I think it was an Instagram post as I was looking at some things, was to ask, who is asking the question? So when you're thinking about an intervention, et cetera, so if we're going to talk about like higher education,
yes,
right, it's also what, right, what needs to happen, but who's asking the what?
There we go.
So that really just kind of hit me right in the forehead.
So,
before we get to the
hold
what
on. Make that a little more real. So, like, give me an example of like where that comes into play, and
So yeah, okay.
like specifically what you're referring to, right?
Yeah. So I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So talking about higher education and training and programs, and we're talking about building curriculum, right? For what that is going to be. And we look back historically, we got the what's going to be taught, we got that. But who was asking the what? Who, in terms of building that?
Who are the leaders?
Who are the leaders who were doing that? And what were they bringing? And who was being left out?
Okay.
Right?
Yes. See, Beth, you're going to get going now. You're going to get.
So, I think that would just take it completely off the table.
There we go.
This is just my idea. So I don't know it to be true. It's just one of my thoughts. And it came up just while I was, looking around, poking around a little bit.
Let's talk about that. Now, Scott, I asked you just the other day a question along these lines. Think about this. Okay, we have our values. But if your values are informed by flawed systems, then, okay, we need to question our values. Are you following me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So that's something to think about. Yes, think about, okay, who sets the priority for what is important, what gets studied, what gets published in our field? Who are the gatekeepers of that?
Sure.
And who isn't?
And who isn't? There we go. And I have been vocal about what my barriers have been in this field. I've been very vocal about that. Who isn't? And there we go. We have humble behavioralism, 1991. We don't see that article, but it's been there.
So so that I think who defined the problem.
There we go. And it's playing out with us, which is why for me, when I practice, when I say strength-based perspective, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah. Think about if we did that as a field, what that would mean, how that could change things for everybody.
For everybody.
For everybody.
It really, the supervision piece is coming up for me in hearing, unfortunately, reading about some supervisors who are maybe early on in their career and are wanting to tell techs, et cetera, what they're doing wrong. And I think this is where the who comes back in. Who's defining the problem? And not that there's not space for that. There's space for that, but I think it has to be an and also, right?
Yes, I agree. Let me ask you this. There was a piece of correspondence that was put out by ABAI either yesterday or the day before. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to see it yet.
I have not.
It was ABAI was advertising a invited speaker from South Africa, but did you see it?
I'm sorry, I have to change my answer. Yes, okay. Yes, that I did. Yes, yeah.
Okay. I had a visceral reaction to it because it reeked of that white saviorism that we're talking about, that lack of cultural humility, not approaching systems from strengths-based perspective. So what are your thoughts on, because it advertised his invited speaker, and it said things like it referred to Africa as a third world nation.
Yes.
A third world country. It was very
red lines. Yeah.
Red lines.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, here we have it. The issue is this organization, there were people in my mind who somebody approved that advertisement going out.
Right.
somebody looked at that. And mind you, because our field doesn't lack intelligent people.
No, it's not intelligent. No, this is insight. This is self-reflection. This is self-awareness.
Yes.
I'm gonna, yeah, yep.
I
have a lot of like, I have a lot of emotion in wanting to protect. I have a lot of emotion in wanting to protect. So I am just gonna be open about that. So I'm gonna model like being self-aware right now for you. Yes. I can feel the urge to want to protect, and I'm just gonna let that hang there.
Yes.
And continue forward in our conversation. Yes, so that self-awareness of, how did that get that far?
How did it get that far? And that's what, when you think about things like white saviorism, is so rooted in the patterns of thinking and the mindset that if you haven't planned to have people in place to push back at it, this is the result.
Yes. Yes.
This is it. Like you said, who's making the decisions, but who is not there?
Who's not there?
Who is not there?
That's right.
That we also have to get present to as well.
Yes.
Otherwise, this shows up, and the sad part is when these white saviorism, however it manifests, when it shows up, it has an impact. And this is what I'll tell you. I didn't come to the field of behavior analysis because it was so wonderful. I didn't. I came to the field because I had a need to be seen and heard, and I knew, or I've been in the field for a long time. I got certified because I really had a need to be seen and heard and have a voice in this field. What I can tell you is over the years, I have developed a profound respect for what the science of behavior can do.
Yes.
And my goal is to disseminate it in a way that people will receive it, and so that it is useful to them. But when we disseminate our science in a way that's disrespectful and doesn't demonstrate value, people push back and say, hell no, I do not want anything you have to give. And
Yep, they start to shut down, and then you're stuck with, how do we get buy-in?
There we go.
We're back.
We're back. That's it. Well, not only that, let me tell you, in my lifetime, what I've seen. I remember back in the 90s I was a young teacher, and I remember the psychologists. Back then, we didn't have BCBAs. I remember a psychologist training me. I had a child who was, you remember the way they used to program in the classrooms? It was very sterile, and they had the dividers and partitions up.
Yep.
So I was in one of these classrooms, and I remember being trained by a psychologist, and this child was in tears for hours. And I remember the psychologist saying, oh, no, this is normal. This is what they all do. Just give them an M&M and reinforce them when they're, and looking back, now having raised a child, that was incredibly it was a traumatic experience for the child, for the other professionals that I had to work with, but it was common practice. Mm-hmm. Then. And it was the way I would never do anything like that today. And I've been trained well enough to understand the role of pairing and the role of relationships. But for a long time, that's the way I was trained to do business. It was normalized for a child to be upset and crying.
You even had a name for it. Work through it.
And that's what they told me. That's what insensitive me, I would go home in tears thinking about these poor babies under my care. They hate coming here until I developed the strong enough voice to say, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Really thankful for when the dissemination of pairing started to hit the circuit back then. It was like,
yes, you remember. Ooh. It was in the night, but I remember.
It was also heartbreaking. Right. Yeah. That moment of like, oh, okay, this is the answer, but also, wow.
the
Past,
damage that was caused.
yes,
But you know what I had to do? I had to really reflect at that time and engage and understand that I'm never a finished product. That even today, I have to continue because what am I doing now that is not what should be happening? It's just the way I've learned to do things. So
that's
that ongoing learning is critical. Never a finished product, which is why in our field now, when I hear the young people come in and they have this entry level credential, it is viewed very much as terminal. The BCBA credential is a beginning. It's not an
yeah,
end. It's a beginning, and I wish we would approach it more that way.
absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
again, we're going to wrap up here in just a few minutes. Just we've talked about a lot. If you had to, just in a couple sentences, just share with practitioners,
Yeah.
parents, anybody, systems administrators, how do you really avoid just the idea of white saviorism? What are some things you can do not to engage in white saviorism?
I think the first thing that really we need to be doing on kind of the macro level is looking how to bring people who need to be heard and need to be involved in the planning of curriculum at the higher ed level. And we need more voices, right?
Yes.
Diverse voices. We need equity across in who is asking the questions, right? So that's one. I think that that's a really powerful piece.
Who? Who is
The,
asking?
yeah,
Okay.
I think that that needs to change. It needs to,
Yes.
if we continue on as we have been, it's just not going to get going off the ground. We're going to keep making dreadful decisions and doing harm.
That's
Happen.
it.
So that's one thing. I think the other thing is using the tools that we do have in the field, which is looking at the mindfulness pieces that are, we'll refer to relational frame theory and what's coming out of that, so that you can start to learn how to recognize your thinking about
Yes.
about your context, what's happening. When you start to do that, that's when you can kind of like peel apart
That's it.
that thought and have a different perspective than just Scott, can you help me here with when that thought is fused is the word I was looking, that you don't even know it's fused.
Yeah. Which just means, if for anyone who's not familiar with the ACT literature, it just means basically thinking your thoughts are real.
That's right.
Or thinking that the world, that your thoughts are a reflection of the world, versus a lens through which shapes your view of the world.
That's it.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
That's it. And that piece, we were doing that. We just didn't know that we were doing that.
That's right.
Yeah. And we were trained to do that.
And you're talking about with reflective practice, right?
Yes, yeah. Reflective practice. And so I think that to know that it can be done, to know that there are tools there, and you can use tools from our own field, as well as tools that already exist. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. And seeking out people who are involved in this work.
Yes.
Seeking out people who are involved in this. So those are weren't a couple of sentences. Sorry, I am verbose.
And I appreciate that. Can I tell you something? What you've really described, as I hear it, is practicing from a framework of cultural humility. You have eloquently described it, defined it. I hear that ongoing learning.
Yes, ongoing learning. That was another one. Yep.
I hear that.
Yep.
Creating systems accountability through looking at higher ed, and the reflective practice.
Yes.
It's all there. So really, by practicing from a lens of cultural humility, we can avoid that saviorism that is so damaging
Yes.
and can really negatively impact the good work we are capable of doing.
Yep. Yep. So I would just say one more thing is
Yes.
be curious.
Oh, yes.
Be curious. Assume you don't know. Just assume you don't know. No, listen, if someone's going to call you out for not knowing something, I think, you're probably just not in the right group. We need to like help each other be comfortable in that not knowing. Assume you don't know and honor it as a curiosity.
Yes. Okay, what you have done is drop some gems today. You have dropped some gems, and this is a gift. So anybody watching this, we had Beth McKee here, the amazing Beth McKee, who just dropped some gems. Thank you.
Yeah.
I thank you from Pivot to Inclusion. I know Scott thanks you. Now, with that said, you have to come back.
Oh, I always love to talk to you.
Good.
I have things to say.
Good. Definitely. So, we're going to just wave goodbye.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Beth.
With you.
Okay, talk to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.